Back at the Amherst kitchen table of Hampshire College astronomer, Mr. Universe, Dr. Salman Hamid, it is NEPM Fund Drive week for the Fall Fund Drive, and like NEPM, there is a member-supported organization that we both really care about called Amherst Cinema, where you sit on the board. And not only is it NEPM Fall Fund Drive week, it is World Space Week. And at Amherst Cinema, there is a film that is perfect for World Space Week where you can interact with the filmmaker after the film this Thursday night.
Right, but just to clarify, I think the movie may not have been there because of World Space Week, but it may have ended up during.
We're going to pretend that this was all intentional.
And this is part of the Bellwether series, which actually highlights first-time filmmakers or sort of like, really young filmmakers. And so this is not a movie that you decide to watch it. Oh, it's starting now and it's going to go next week. It is one-time screening, and the filmmaker is going to be available for Q&A via Zoom.
The thing that's awesome about Bellwether is that was one of the things that Amherst Cinema was doing that was cut because of federal funding, but then the community rallied together very quickly to revive that series and fund it, right?
Yes, and it was actually amazing the way community responded to that. In fact, immediately there was a sort of tremendous outpouring of support. And it just reminds you, or at least it reminded us, both the wonderfulness of our community and also we really appreciate that people in this area love art and love films, and that they would actually really feel so strongly about it.
And that program was rescued, and it's continuing now, just like you can rescue NEPM right now by going to nepm.org or 800-639-8850. The movie, Little, Big, and Far, what I've read, surrounds the idea of technocrats and fascism and capitalism taking over space, which is a little bit what we're going to be talking about for World Space Week and some of the problems that are surrounding our modern era when it comes to space and space exploration. It's World Space Week to honor Sputnik, right?
Yeah, so World Space Week was started by the UN General Assembly in 1999. And so it's from October 4th to October 10th. And October 4th is the date for the launch of Sputnik. So that's a really, obviously 1957, a crucial date, which, the mythology goes sort of in the US also people remember because here was the first satellite that was going around every 90 minutes. And it basically was a key moment for humanity, that this is the time when you actually are putting things in orbit. But October 10th, 1967, so this was about 10 years after. It's also a crucial time, and World Space Week also commemorates that because that was the signing of the Outer Space Treaty. Mm-hmm. And this is the treaty that is quite optimistic in nature. It was signed at the height of the Cold War, before humans had stepped on the moon. And the treaty has elements that says, for example, that space should be explored for all of humanity. No nation, for example, can own a piece of a heavenly body, the moon or the asteroids or the comets or the planets.
Or the International Star Registry.
Oh, right. And so it was actually quite a positive and optimistic treaty. And so I think, and that's the only one in some sense about space that everybody has agreed to.
And they agreed to it 50 years ago or something.
More than that.
Yeah.
And they tried to have it in an international moon treaty as well, which was not ratified, especially by those countries that actually had been to the moon or were planning on going to the moon. And so that has not been successful. But Outer Space Treaty, everybody is bound by it. Both the positives and the negatives to that is that because everybody had to agree on it, there is ambiguity in the language of the treaty. And now we are in an era when a lot of the ways it has to be interpreted is being challenged, in particular by private space companies, because at the time when the Outer Space Treaty was signed in 1967, private space companies going to space and doing things was not imagined at the time, but now there is in some ways a loophole that that multinational corporations, for example, can exploit.
So when we think about Sputnik, we think about the space race between Russia and the United States, and that was at least nations in a pseudo-military fashion doing things that were important for exploration and science. We've fully entered the commercial space era, and when it comes to satellites like Sputnik, there is one giant, or I guess thousands of giant, literally glaring errors in regards to satellites in space and what they represent as space as neutral territory for the betterment of humanity and science.
I mean, I want to be clear that satellites have done a tremendous job, a lot of positive stuff as well. I mean, we know, there are satellites that have helped, for example, in irrigation, satellites that have helped in mapping, even human rights violations. There are satellites that have told us about the weather forecasting that has really improved because of satellites.
Not to mention the fact every time you turn your GPS on, that's essentially satellite technology.
So satellites have been, so in that context, I mean, if you are thinking about the human history in that sense, I think Sputnik would show up as a key moment because it really transformed the way we use technology for a lot, for sort of use space, and we use technology to help us in many ways. And but I would, before we go to the darker side, Monty, I do want to say it is quite incredible that Sputnik was in 1957, not that far back, and yet we now have right now as we speak satellites orbiting the moon. We have satellites orbiting Mars. We have a mission that is going to Mercury right now that is going to go in orbit. We have a mission right now that is going around Jupiter, a satellite going around Jupiter. So it is really incredible that since 1957, when the first satellite went into orbit, and it was a radical, dramatic, revolutionary stuff. And now, apart from putting a lot of satellites on Earth, which we'll come back to it in a second, we can actually put satellites and study the bodies around in the solar system, including, by the way, comets and asteroids, because they were also NASA and European Space Agency and the Japanese Space Agency have gotten samples back, for example, from asteroids and comets, first by orbiting it, studying it, and then landing on it and getting their samples back. So satellites since 1957, since Sputnik, they have played an important role, a crucial role, both in terms of making our lives better, but also in terms of space exploration and how we think about what we learn about our solar system. But, and that's where the big but was coming in. Anything that is too much can be a problem. And I think this is what we are learning, whether, hey, cars, well, that is great. Too many cars, a problem.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, so you can actually think about going in that same direction. And for satellites, up until a few years ago, even up until 2020, the total number of satellites in our night sky or in our skies were measured in a few thousand. Mm-hmm. So this is 2020. And right now, the number, as of I checked, May of 2025, the number was over 11,700.
Wow. So an 11 times increase in just 5 years.
So you are talking about, right, I mean, so you are talking about way back from 1957 to 2020, a few thousand satellites, which is quite a bit, by the way.
Yeah.
But between 2020 and now, you have increased from a few thousand to 11,700.
Why are there so many in such short a period of time?
And when you look at those numbers, a lot of them, SpaceX has about 60% of those satellites because they are being launched as part of Constellation, and so as part of Starlink. So 7,400.
Starlink is what?
Well, Starlink is the way, it's Elon Musk's company, and or it's a satellite constellation owned by SpaceX, and it provides the internet to a lot of communities, but also to military. It actually came up in the conversations around Ukraine and Russia war as well. But the point is that right now there are more than 7,000 Starlink satellites that were all launched after 2019. And they're not the only one. There is another company, OneWeb, which is a London-based company. It has over 650 satellites in its constellation. And you go like, okay, all right, we have to be like, worried about it. Let's see what happens. The problem is that right now, at least on paper, there are requests for satellites that number in tens of thousands in the next couple of years. And in fact, the estimate is that by 2050, we are going to potentially reach a number of 100,000. And that's all actually our atmosphere. I think actually more than that, that will create problems. But you have a lot of satellites up in the air, up in space. And apart from other problems that people worry about, including environmental ones, because they actually constantly, they have to be in orbit, but because a lot of them are in low Earth orbit, they also burn up in the atmosphere, and that also produces problems. But for astronomers, so we started with the wonderful learning about our solar system through satellites, through orbiters that actually went to other star systems. Well, now these satellites are a major threat to astronomy. And partly it's because our telescopes are becoming more and more sensitive. And so we talked about, for example, the Vera Rubin Observatory, which is an incredible telescope which is going to be scanning the entire sky every 3 days for 10 years. I mean, this is an unprecedented survey, and it's going to basically create a movie in some sense, if you think about of the night sky. And so we are going to see exploding stars, we are going to see comets, we are going to see asteroids, we are going to see stars in sort of like variations in it, and so on and so forth, and things that we have never seen before. But these satellites are a major threat to it because they actually don't go in a particular direction. I mean, it depends upon when they are going into the field of view of the telescope. They can actually leave streaks. And now that the telescopes are sensitive, those streaks are quite bright, and those images are usually cannot be used. And astronomers have been in conversation, especially with SpaceX, and they have been responsive to a certain degree, but it's an uphill battle.
We hear so much about looking at distant galaxies and distant stars and the ability of our space telescopes in particular to like cancel out the dust that may surround some star system, etc. Can't the telescopes cancel out the interference from these now tens of or thousands, 10,000 satellites that are interfering with our telescopes that are earthbound?
Not that easy, because those are at different times that come through. They come in at different angles and so on and so forth. So it's a very, very hard problem to do that. So astronomers really got worried about it a few years ago. And right now, the International Astronomical Union, that's the largest body of astronomers that represents sort of like an astronomy interests in the world. So IAU, International Astronomical Union, has now a virtual center for the protection of the dark and quiet sky from satellite constellation interference.
Does it have a cool acronym?
CPS. I never usually they try to come up with that, but it's CPS, and they are really trying to make sure that astronomy is protected. And just think about what I'm saying. I mean, this is an existential threat to astronomy, that astronomy is really protected. So the kind of cool things that we learn about, there are these telescopes that are being built. Well, some of these won't be able to be used. And this is in the optical or the visible light. Then you have radio interference. So radio telescopes actually rely on sort of like, looking at the universe in radio waves, which is another form of light. But a lot of these satellites, they communicate in radio waves as well. And even though There are protective bands for astronomy. Sometimes satellites, because they don't care that much about a little bit of leakage. Everything is expensive, right? I mean, so if you are really going to protect the band in which you are communicating, then you would require to spend more money on it. And for astronomers, any leakage of the signal into bands that, for example, can tell you about hydrogen or other molecules that are in the universe that can unlock the secrets about the history of the universe, well, it's really important for astronomers, but as you know, people don't do astronomy for money purposes. And for commercial interest, for the satellites companies, for them, that's not the crucial thing to actually protect those bands. And so this is a really important context. And in fact, so this group, CPS, which is again the Center for the Protection of Dark and Quiet Sky from Satellite Constellation Interference, they are playing a key role, including taking this case to the United Nations for the protection of our skies. And we may not realize, and again, for a lot of people listening to it, it's like, well, I mean, I haven't heard of it. What's going on? Well, this is a major issue for astronomy, and these satellites, the number, the way they are increasing, this is not, oh, we are talking about 10 years down the road. We are talking about right now. Each year, the number of satellites is increasing quite dramatically, and China is now entering this as well. And so it's going to be quite a busy place. And if you think that Earth is not just enough to worry about, right now that same issue is going to be coming up on the moon as well. And moon, certainly in the far side of the moon, is protected from radio interference from the Earth. And so astronomers think that the far side of the moon is going to be an amazing place for radio astronomy. But there are already a couple. Right now, it's only 3 satellites orbiting around the moon, but there is a chance that soon there will be a lot more. So we have to think about it. We have to think about what is important for humanity. What is, it's just like light pollution. How much do we care of the night sky? And so for astronomers, and I hope for other people as well, we think of the night sky as a heritage of humanity. And we have Professor James Lowenthal, for example, at Smith College. I mean, he's a huge advocate of the dark sky, night sky, and we can actually protect it on ourselves, on our individual levels, but also we have to raise a voice at both a local governmental level and also international level.